Welcome to part 2 of my Pac-Man World Retrospective. Last time I took a look at the first game, its remake, and its first sequel. And like I promised at the end of that video, today we'll be ending things off with the final game in the series, Pac-Man World 3. After World 2's success, Namco of course wanted a third game, a nicely rounded out trilogy of platformers. However, even though World 2 came out 3 years after the first, Pac-Man World 3 wouldn't see the light of day until another 3 years later in 2005. So why is that? World 1 had to be completely rebooted in development after Ghost Zone shit the bed, World 2 had to be toned back in scope, which explained its relatively by-the-numbers structure, but a third time in development hell? Really? Surely they could have gotten development under control for the third entry in a series, right? Well, it turns out Home Tech was actually making a Pac-Man game in a completely different style to the World series called Pac-Man Adventures. Its development is a mystery other than concept art and storyboards that were created by Don Bluth. Yes, that Don Bluth.
Dragon's Lair!
After Adventures was canned around 2004, Namco greenlit a third World game. However, Home Tech would be completely out of the picture, and Pac-Man World 3 arrived in late 2005 to celebrate Pac-Man's 25th anniversary. Pretty ironic considering the first World game was also an anniversary title. At least they got the date right this time. So if Home Tech wasn't brought on after Adventures was scrapped, who the hell made this thing anyway? Well, it turns out Pac-Man World 3 was outsourced to none other than Blitz Games. These guys made classic after classic, working on rules. Well, interesting start if we're dealing with a team that's been mostly relegated to licensed kids shovelware. You thought World 1's development cycle was a train wreck? At least Home Tech still got to make that game. This is just depressing. You know the situation is bad when they hire an outside studio like Blitz Games to handle the third major entry in a successful franchise and not a spin-off. Looks like Namco not caring about their in-house IPs has been a tradition for almost 2 decades. Don't worry though, we'll get back to that topic later, but is the game any good? How's that for a killer title screen? Doesn't that get you hyped up for another fun platforming adventure with
The Great Yellow One?
Real upbeat and fitting of the series, of course. Seriously, what the hell is this? Am I really about to play Pac-Man World 3 or fucking Silent Hill? Compare this to the first game. Vibrant, jazzy, in your face. Second game? A bit more calm, but still upbeat. Then you have this, which is like, okay, why so serious all of a sudden? You've got some creepy ambience with this Windows XP background, and it doesn't pair well with the other games at all. About that intro cutscene, instead of playing before the title screen, it's moved to starting a new save file, which definitely makes more sense. 90% of players are going to be mashing buttons to try to skip the logos anyway, so save the cutscene for the actual game, you know? Unlike the creepy CGI they used for the first 2 games, World 3 uses in-game assets for the intro, even if it's still compressed to FMVs. Definitely a bit nicer on the eyes, even if it's at a lower resolution.
Junior! 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 Junior, you didn't happen to see the... Oh, thanks, Snooky.
Ooh, voice acting. World 1's voices, aside from... were mostly confined to Talkman, the Ghosts, and one line from Miss Pac-Man.
I thought you had captured Pac-Man!
We did, see? Oops.
If I had a power
A
pellet,
slight error on our part. Believe me, it...
World 2 was just Spooky and Professor Pac.
Take these golden fruit that imprisoned me and follow me.
Pac-Man! Pac-Man! Terrible, terrible news!
But here, this is fully scripted and it's actually not extremely corny. The casting seems pretty good, however Pac-Man himself is still completely silent.
Did someone say cake?
What?
Cherry meringue sugar stuffed power pellet a l'orange? You shouldn't have.
I ain't seeing this, man.
It just sounds so old.
Aw, sweetie, you're only as 25 as you feel.
Yep, he talks. Full stop. And the voice they picked is...
At least this birthday's still better than my 20th.
oddly natural. He's not obnoxious or idiotic, he's just a dude.
Don't panic! Everything's under control. I don't think it'll happen.
This actually isn't the first time they gave Pac-Man a voice. Before this game, there was the Hanna-Barbera cartoon series.
Okay, Chomp Chomp, catch!
No, Chomp Chomp, no!
Say what you want about if Pac-Man should talk or not, but he could sound a whole lot worse.
Yo, 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 yo!
I have a whole lot more to say, but we'll get back to that when we talk about sound later. As for the visuals, I'm mixed. Very mixed. Character models look good, their mouths actually move this time when speaking unlike World 2, and the game runs at a smooth 60 FPS. What's the problem, you might ask? That boils down to the game's overall art style. What the hell am I looking at? It looks like they took World 2's levels and dropped an atomic bomb on them. The only Pac-Man-like area in the whole game is Pac Village in the first cutscene. The character models are another case of the game not having a consistent art style. I said they looked good earlier, and I still stand by that, they're good models, but standing around Pac-Man characters, they look dumb and out of place. The enemies from the first 2 games at least looked like they were from the same universe, but here they didn't even try to make them look consistent. The biggest example of this is the new villain, Irwin. Homer Simpson called, he wants his receding hairline back. The levels honestly look pretty good. Yeah, some of the textures are a little muddy, but I really like them. But once again, they're completely out of place. They look good on their own and would work well in something like the Jak and Daxter sequels or Half-Life, but when there's pack dots and fruits everywhere, they look stupid. This feels like an edgy fan game I'd find on Game Jolt, not a commercial product. Were they seriously this desperate to try and fit in with the 2000s edge of the time? Were the Hot Topic kids really going out in droves to buy this game because it looks more like Deus Ex?
Why are you locked in the bathroom?
Oh, whatever. The game still looks good for a late-release PS2 title. That reminds me, this game was also a multiplat like Pac-Man World 2, but with a much bigger catch this time. Even though I'm playing the PS2 version, if you watched Part 1, you would have known that I played Pac-Man World 2 on GameCube via Dolphin, and since Dolphin is a better emulator than PCSX2, you might be wondering why I went for PS2 this time. Well, unfortunately, every other version of this game sucks. The Xbox version mostly runs at 60 FPS, but it drops into the single digits at times and it's really bad to play. The GameCube port has missing sound effects, weird button mapping, and a lower frame rate, and like World 2, the PC port is also shit. So how's about that gameplay? We've got fresh new blood working on an established sub-series, so let's see Blitz Games spin on the formula. Right away, the overworld is completely gone. World 1 had Ghost Island, World 2 had an overworld map as well as Pac Village, but World 3 just has a level select in the main menu. Nothing to tie the adventure together or give you the feeling you're actually making progress, you know? But that's a small issue, it doesn't matter that much in the grand scheme of things, so how does the actual gameplay compare to the other games? For starters, Pac-Man does have his signature moves from the first 2 games, the butt bounce and rev roll, but for the third ability, instead of throwing pack dots or doing a mid-air flip kick, Pac-Man takes care of enemies by beating the shit out of them. Oh my god, this is awesome. Yeah, fuck him up, he doesn't need to throw dots, he's gonna throw those hands! Unfortunately, this novelty wears off in about 5 minutes. This attack can only be performed in the same 3-punch combo over and over again. Butt bouncing doesn't really mix things up or do any extra damage, so this game's combat gets very repetitive really fast. Some enemies like these Beyblade looking guys require the butt bounce, but for the rest of the game you're just tapping circle. It doesn't really help that enemies take several combos to go down, and there's tons of them. You're going to be spending a lot of your time just hitting the button until all of them are dead. And some of these enemies are absolute tanks. Look at this crap. Oh my god!
I'm gonna be doing a lot of this, aren't I?
To make matters worse, most of the time you have to fight these guys to progress. You do get a few power-ups to aid you in combat, but they're relatively unhelpful, and punching them just works better most of the time. One allows you to circle around enemies to deal damage, which Sonic Frontiers totally didn't rip off. Another is the Super Butt Bounce from World 1, but with an unnecessary charging animation that enemies can shoot you out of, and another one turns you into Emperor Palpatine. This electrical attack especially sucks ass through a straw. Certain enemies get absolutely obliterated by it, while others only get stunned, and this replaces your punching until it runs out, so avoid this thing at all costs. The power-ups aren't all there is to spice the gameplay up though. In a bold move, this game has sections where you control either Pinky or Clyde. Yeah, the ghosts are on your side in this game. Pinky gets to manipulate the environment to create platforms, while Clyde gets to do more combat. There isn't much to comment on for Pinky, but I've got some bitching for Clyde. His primary attack is shooting ghost rays, I guess, but the hitboxes for the projectiles are questionable at best, and you fire in the direction you're facing, so to reorient yourself, you gotta move too. Both of them involve collecting energy as ammunition for their abilities. Clyde's projectiles are infinite, but his super is what his ammo's used for. What really bothers me about these sections is the awful filter they put over the screen. Was this really necessary? I thought it was PCSX2 being stupid again, but this is baked into the game. Is there anything else I can do here besides play as the ghosts?
I want you to help me calibrate Pac-Man.
Pac-Man? You have a new Pac-Man? A new big giant robot Pac-Man?
Holy shit, I get to control Pac-Man?
More than a normal giant robot, Pac-Man.
Oh, fuck off, dude. What am I looking at? This isn't Pac-Man, it's Cheapy McCheapskate. If you're gonna redesign a character, you're gonna have to at least try to make them look at least a tad bit familiar. I've seen a lot of people divided over re-pac's design of Pac-Man, but at least he's still recognizable there. This doesn't even fit the criteria. The actual gameplay is nothing to write home about. You alternate between L2 and R2 to swing the arms around, while occasionally doing a super spin thing. These segments are really short, and there's only 2 of them in the whole game. Why hype this up if you're not gonna use it? Why couldn't there be a few more of these to make it worth programming in, or perhaps make it a summon in the regular levels to spice up the combat? Speaking of which, enemies are not very fun to fight. They're not particularly difficult, but my god, they're obnoxious. These robots on wheels fire projectiles when you're too far away, but if you get close, they often no-clip away from you, so you gotta chase them around. A very common type you see throughout the game are these ogres. They're pitifully easy to fight, so I don't understand how they can be reused so late into the game. But don't worry, some of them are red and have spikes. Totally unique enemy design, 10 out of 10.
Change the color, add some stripes, a little hair, and voila!
Oh, and by the way, enemies love to attack in groups and gang up on your ass, so have fun with that. One specific enemy type I absolutely hate are these bugs on the ground. Yeah, stupid little fucking bugs. Just regular ass bugs. Why, you ask? Because they serve
Zero purpose.
They don't halt progression, they just exist to make you have to jump to avoid taking damage. It's obnoxious when you die to one of these things because you aren't paying attention and you're almost dead. They spawn several at a time too, so have fun butt bouncing all of them until they stop appearing in the hole. Existing moves now have alterations made. Not a bad idea on paper, and it's really not a problem with the rev roll. In the first 2 games, pressing the jump button cancels it out. This was a major mechanic in World 2 because it was essential for landing on smaller platforms. Here though, you can actually jump during a rev roll, and it's not a bad mobility tool. Then we have butt bouncing. This has been completely reworked into an attack move. Pac-Man now slams on the ground 3 times in a combo. Like I said earlier, some enemies go down easier with it, but other than that, it feels redundant. Outside of combat, it's completely useless unless you're hitting a button or something. You don't gain height, and after the 3rd bounce it cancels out, so you can't even bounce around for fun like in the other games. Considering you can't use it as a mobility tool to, you know, bounce around, I'm going to refer to the butt bounce as the Sphincter Slam for the rest of the video. Pac-Man has also received a number of extra mobility tools. You can now wall jump, swing on rails, climb certain terrain, and slide down poles. Ledge grabbing has returned as well, but it doesn't feel as good to use as in World 2. It's still way better than in World 1 though. The platforming as a whole really isn't all that fun. It's not awful, but it feels shallow a lot of the time. Swinging on poles and wall jumping feels good, but the levels are designed in such a way that doesn't bring out their full potential. And that's the biggest issue with the game, the levels. The first 2 games are linear 3D platformers with a tried and true get to the end objective. Some levels differed, like the Clown 3 in World 1 or night crawling in World 2. This game does mostly focus on reaching the end of the level, but instead of platforming being the main focus, not only do you have the extra emphasis on combat like I mentioned earlier, but puzzles and fetch quests as well. You could be on your merry way and all of a sudden the game stops you dead in your tracks to tell you to go get the thing. And said thing is never clearly hidden or anything, you just have to get it. The puzzles also just exist. For the most part, it's really nothing all that difficult. Use Clyde to break the pillars to create bridges. Sphincter slam the pillars. Rev roll the thing to move a platform. All this really does is pad out the levels to artificially make them longer. Speaking of length, the average level in the first 2 games lasts about 5 to 7 minutes. Not here though, not by a long shot. These levels are fucking huge. It usually takes me about half an hour each to complete a level in this game. Just for comparison, my recording of the second area of Pac-Man World 2 is 34 minutes, while my file for level 5 alone of World 3 is 33 minutes. The length isn't really justified either. These levels are barren wastelands with nothing going on. So much empty space, like why is this area so big? Oh no. I forgot about the Spectrals. Since the ghosts are on your side in this game plot-wise, these guys take their place. The idea is the same basically. Invincible enemies that can only be taken out with the power pellet. How did they fuck it up? Let me explain. First off, Pac-Man's movement speed isn't exactly fast. It works fine most of the time, but when chasing enemies, it's such a slog because of how slow you are. It doesn't really help that you have to sit through an eating animation while the other ones are still running away, wasting precious time considering these power pellets have the same expiration rate as the previous games even though you move slower. And when you're not invincible, these guys are just as fast as you. They're right on your tail when you don't have a power pellet. Second, rev rolling doesn't help in the slightest, because not only is it more difficult to stop considering you can jump in a rev roll now, but if you hit them head on, you bounce off of them! It works so seamlessly in the other games because they acted like collectibles and there was no animation. Third, these guys spawn in groups. Usually it's 3 or 4 ghosts at a time in the previous games, but here, more and more keep coming out of the portal until they're finished. They have similar properties to the other enemies where they keep respawning for a while. This isn't fucking Devil May Cry, guys, enough with the hordes of enemies. But I know exactly what you're thinking. They're just optional enemies to get for those stupid points in the other games. Just walk past them. Well, not in this piece of shit! You are required to get rid of all of the spectrals when they appear to progress. Try walking past the portal? No luck. You're stuck until they're gone. Just like with the fetch quests and forced combat sequences, this is all padding. Sometimes it makes you do this with Clyde as well, and it sounds way more bearable considering they die in 2 hits from Clyde's projectiles, but so many more spawn to compensate, and the hitboxes for Clyde's attacks are questionable at best. Was this really necessary? Was this series yearning for forced combat sections?
It'd be a bleak day when a true ghost would be worried by spectral slime like you.
As I was saying about the empty areas, all that space is merely used for collectibles. Fruit makes a return, but they serve only to tally up a number at the end of the level. You don't open or unlock anything with fruit anymore. Locked doors now require level-specific collectibles like a key to get past the door, but the fruit still remains, and my god, it's everywhere. These areas are absolutely littered with optional collectibles. It really feels like they made these massive ravines but didn't have time to properly design them in the full levels, so they shat dots and fruit everywhere to justify their size. These were fun to go after in World 2, but here it's such a chore to sniff around every huge room like a dog to find all the collectibles. There's more than just the fruit and pack dots though. There's also 25th anniversary statues and these card things. What do they do? I don't know, and I honestly don't care enough to go after them. After a while, I just stopped going after most collectibles because I was just wasting time finding them and I just wanted this to be over with. This game is just so fucking boring and mediocre. I'm sorry if I can't think of any jokes to add here, but this game gives me nothing to work with, so all I can really do is complain. Speaking of complaining, Level 7!
Final Fantasy IV.
300 black men for only £2.
What the? Hey!
New Pac-Man pasta from Chef Boyardee.
On a bit of a lighter note, let's talk about glitches, because this game has a lot of them. This could potentially be because I'm playing the game through PCSX2, but most of these just feel like part of the actual game for me. Enemy animations don't like to perform, textures flicker on the floor, the game kills me even though I grabbed a ledge and didn't fall, enemies forget that they're not on ice and start sliding around, hitboxes seemingly become detached from their objects sometimes, and Pac-Man likes to walk in place during cutscenes. Also, this isn't a glitch, but insanely bad programming. Enemies like to spawn completely out of nowhere, and if you happen to be near their spawn point... epic. In terms of the music, I praised the soundtracks of the previous 2 games in Part 1, but how did Blitz Games handle this game's music? It's actually pretty easy to describe the soundtrack. What's the word I'm looking for? Oh yeah, bad. Okay, that's a bit unfair. The music isn't bad per se, just insanely forgettable and bland. I already talked about the title screen music earlier, but in fact most of the soundtrack goes for this more ambient approach. Simply put, I don't think this was a very good idea. It makes an already boring game even more boring. Probably the most vibrant track in the whole game is the maze theme, and even then it's fine. There's nothing really wrong with it, but I don't find it enjoyable either. Oh yeah, that's the only maze theme in the whole game. Compare that to World 1 and 2 where every maze had a unique track. The actual level themes aren't very memorable either. It's not always calm and ambient, as there are a few set pieces with more intense backing tracks, but again, these are not very memorable. It's just dun 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 dun. Now I know what you're thinking. Joe, it's just music. How much could music possibly add to a game? And you've got a point. Gameplay is more important than music. However, music can not only add to certain set pieces, but just provide some banger tracks. Case in point, the other World games. This boring background noise is fucking sleep-inducing. Let's compare some tracks to those from previous games. You see what I mean? Sometimes those little things can add so much to a game's overall fun factor. Again, the music isn't a deal breaker. I can play games just fine without amazing music as long as the game is fun. Recently, I've been having a blast with the Resident Evil 4 remake. Forgettable music isn't a problem when I can do shit like this. But compared to the previous games, World 3's music is just blech. As for the game's voice acting, where do I begin? Like I said earlier, the casting is fine. Pac-Man and Orson sound acceptable, which is important because you're going to be listening to them talk to each other constantly throughout the game, so it's good they didn't screw that up.
Pac-Man, the whole of the spectral realm is collapsing.
Not good.
Pinky and Clyde, on the other hand, have New York accents. Why?
And if I'm charged up at a spectral fountain, I can make those platforms solid enough even for you.
Are you gonna tell me what you done with my boys Inky and Blinky?
But there's another thing that kills the voice acting in this game. The writing is god-awful. Despite the dark tone surrounding the game, the writing tries to stick to a goofier style. I usually don't mind this, and there's a lot of games that do that well, but here it's completely out of place, just like the areas and characters. It feels like it was made for a sitcom at times, and it clashes with the literal world-ending stakes in the story.
Waka waka.
He's small, evil, and wants to plug me into a giant energy-sucking machine.
As a giant robot fitted with arms that go puncha, puncha.
Plus a gun that goes daka daka.
I'd better get it chomping.
If you can knock something suitably large into the vortex, it should knock it out completely.
Sounds like when Miss Pac sucks up one of my power pellets in the vacuum cleaner.
Get it? It's funny because woman!
His traps lack imagination, Orson.
Oh, you mean just like the rest of this game? Oh, and you're gonna love this. They decided that sexual innuendos would be a good idea. What, you don't believe me? Take a listen.
I'm detecting a rise in energy in your sector, Pac-Man.
Details of my sector's energy should be between me and Miss Pac. Thank you very much.
You're starting to look even more spherical than usual.
Hey, Miss Pac-Man likes me cuddly, okay?
Thanks, Blitz Games, for telling me that Miss Pac-Man has a chub fetish. I totally needed to know that. Don't forget the awful editing and grammar. Sometimes there's a period where a question mark should be.
You know your way around, fella?
There's this really funny part in level 7 where Orson's dialogue has Pac-Man's portrait.
Nice work, Pac-Man. You should be able to get out of this cavern now.
And other times the voice recording cuts off too early.
You're never going to defeat me, so why even bother?
You're messing with forces you don't understand, pea-brain.
Boy, I really hope somebody got fired for that blunt. Not to mention, this game's script is carelessly cobbled together and held with duct tape. Pac-Man, Orson, Clyde, and not really Pinky all communicate through voice calls of some kind, maybe walkie-talkies, I guess. But when you run into some of the one-off characters in certain levels, they start joining in on the calls with the same voice compression filter applied. It's never explained how they're doing this. Are they transmitting brainwaves?
It's more like a brainwave. What? Brainwave?
Irwin joins in on this too. What the hell is going on? Pac-Man just talks normally while everyone else sounds like they're in a Halo lobby. Blitz Games also likes to throw these new characters away whenever they feel like it. This orange guy just leaves after level 5. I guess he's dead. We never even got his name. Also, this line from Orson?
Get him!
That's the last you see or hear from him in the entire game. The cutscenes following this final boss do not feature him. Speaking of which, that reminds me, I completely forgot to talk about the bosses, so let's talk about them. All 2 of them. No, you did not hear that wrong. There's literally only 2 bosses in the entire game. Both of them are Irwin, and both of them are pathetic. Okay, that's a bit harsh. They're a little challenging, I guess, but I had way more trouble with the bosses in the other games, and they were way more interesting. Irwin shoots lasers, you rev-roll pillars, sphincter slam the robot over and over, and you win. Irwin fucking dies, Pac-Man goes home, the ghosts drop by and call Junior Pac-Man slurs, and the game is over. Ay ay ay, what the hell happened here? Almost all of the good ideas Blitz games brought to the table were fumbled. The combat is awful, the platforming is run-of-the-mill and generic, new characters and areas do not fit this series in the slightest, there's only 2 bosses that basically play the same, the music sucks, the levels are way too long, it barely works half the damn time, and it's just a bad game. But hey, at least you can still play Arcade Pac-Man from the main menu. That's it, I take back all complaints, this game is a masterpiece. The thing that irks me the most about it is the title. Simply put, this game should not have been called Pac-Man World 3. It shares almost nothing in common with the previous games aside from one plot element that wasn't even represented in the best way here. I'm not gonna say sequels being different is bad, because other franchises changed things up pretty well with sequels. The Postal series went from an isometric shooter where you have to kill all hostiles to progress, to an open world sandbox with errands to run each day, where violence is completely optional and you can beat the game without drawing your firearm. Mainline Mario titles dropped linearity when going 3D, and changed the main focus to collecting stars instead. Resident Evil went on from defining the horror genre and literally coining the phrase survival horror, to going more action-oriented with Resident Evil 4, focusing on combat and resource management. 2 of these very different sequels are some of the highest rated games ever made, and Postal 2 is just a personal favorite of mine.
Nothing personal, man, but you're fired.
But I just started yesterday.
But Pac-Man World 3's changes don't fit well with the rest of the series. It feels misguided and uninspired. I know it's a little crazy to compare a studio like Blitz Games to the standard of a game like Resident Evil 4, but what I'm trying to say here is that sequels can be different from their predecessors as long as the game is good and it fits said series. Point is, this shouldn't be called World 3. They could have called it something else, hell, they could have called it Pac-Man Adventures like the cancelled game, but no, they just had to cash in on the name and end the series on a sour note.
We had a good thing, you stupid son of a bitch. It was perfect. But no, you just had to blow it up. You and your pride and your ego.
Namco called this game Pac-Man World 3 to sell copies, despite it basically being its own thing from a separate studio. Wait, let's back up. I very briefly touched upon the game's development early on in the video, but I didn't tell the whole story. To sum it up, Namco greenlit the project after canning Pac-Man Adventures in 2004. A decent chunk of Don Bluth's ideas actually made it into World 3, believe it or not. Yet another reason I think this game should have been called Pac-Man Adventures and not Pac-Man World 3. It had a very rough development cycle, with Blitz Games planning a lot of features like an inventory and shop system, as well as wanting the game to be open world. These 2 elements being cut probably explain the enormous levels and barren combat system with hordes of enemies it wasn't designed for. Production was already shitty, but then Namco got way too horny and began their merger with Bandai. Business merger shenanigans started as usual, with Namco cancelling each of their planned Pac-Man projects at that point, including World 3. However, Blitz Games begged Namco to let them finish the game, because they were an independent studio that mostly did contract work for other publishers, and they had no work besides World 3 at the time, and they couldn't afford to have the game cancelled. So Namco gave in, but with a catch. They cut their funding from Blitz Games and demanded the game to be released by the end of 2005, presumably for the 25th anniversary of Pac-Man. It seems like they just barely made it, because World 3 ended up being a loss for Blitz Games, meaning they didn't make a profit from the game's release at all. This entire situation goes to show how brutal the industry can be. Blitz had to lick the boot of Namco just to finish the game, and they still lost money in the end. Jeez, now I feel really bad for shit-talking them in the beginning. Not only have they actually released a few solid games, but they wound up shutting down in 2013, so despite their huge misfire for World 3, I'm not going to blame it entirely on them. Nah, I've got someone else to point my finger to. You! This is Namco's fault for handing the project to the developers of Bratz Rock Angels in the first place. What higher up in the company looked at their work and said, "Oh mate, these are the guys up to this task, yeah?" I get that they're a corporation and their entire objective is to make money and all, but you seriously outsourced the third entry in a very successful platforming series to them? Really? You know what helps profits? Good PR. And this came out before bad games were a mass laughingstock that led to online hits, and a bunch of masochists buying the game for themselves and generating a profit for the company anyway. Back in the 2000s, if a game was bad, people just didn't buy it. But I guess it didn't matter to Namco because they were in bed with Daddy Bandai in a merger. Not to mention they cut Blitz's funding so they weren't losing that much money on the game anyway. They didn't care, and this is the start of the trend of Namco not caring. What do I mean by this? Well, ever since Bandai swallowed the company whole, Namco's output of their original IPs slowly degraded to the point where they become an unimportant task for the company. Bandai is a mega corporation with merchandising rights to almost every major anime and manga property out there. They have the anime industry in a brutal stranglehold to the point where entire shows get cancelled because they weren't selling enough of their damn toys. Case in point, Dragon Ball Kai.
Don't stop, we're in love now. Don't stop, there's so much to be found. We can't find paradise. All we have to do is go, free your soul. Dragon Soul!
Bandai's merchandise sales were low, so that was a major reason it got cancelled before they brought it back for the Boo Saga 5 years later. So considering their major involvement with the anime industry, after their merger with Namco, the games they published were mostly shovelware tie-in games with the anime IPs they have at their disposal, with heritage Namco franchises taking a back seat. However, they've tried to reboot their franchises to appeal to modern audiences while making major changes. And what has this led to? The Wii remake of Klonoa and Pac-Man and the Ghostly Adventures. Both were bad, fans criticized them, Bandai Namco deemed them failures, and they went back to releasing more anime games. Pac-Man was since relegated to strictly mobile games and merchandise, with Namco staying tight-lipped about the World Series. They acted like it was a skeleton in the closet and they were embarrassed by it. Like, hey guys, it's another Pac-Man mobile game, you know that yellow guy from the arcades who had nothing else to his name, totally? The anti-world attitude of Namco went so far that when they were planning for Pac-Man to be in Smash for Wii U and 3DS, they wanted the Ghostly Adventures incarnation instead of his classic look. And the series director Masahiro Sakurai literally threatened to remove Pac-Man from the roster entirely unless the classic design was used instead. However, outside of the design, Pac-Man's moveset still refrained from referencing the World Series. No rev roll, no butt bounce, he kind of tosses Pac Dots but they behave very differently, and his up air might be a reference to World 2? They chose fucking Pac-Land for the stage, and not a single world track is featured in the game's song list. This was likely the result of mandates from Namco, as IP holders are allowed to give restrictions when a third-party character is added to Smash Bros., which is why Snake never got new codecs for his return in Ultimate, Mega Man is completely mute despite talking in several games, Sonic reusing voice lines from several games in Smash 4 and Ultimate despite being fully voiced by Jason Griffith in Brawl, and Final Fantasy only having 2 music tracks in Smash 4 and the launch version of Ultimate before they added Sephiroth and brought in more songs. Point is, Namco has demoted Pac-Man to tank wipe until 2022 when they announced re-pac, and even then, that project was given a very small budget and they put in almost no effort to market it other than a limited edition Xbox Series S. The company has even gone on record saying that re-pac was developed in the first place as a result of fan feedback. Yep, they literally admitted to making it to get fans to shut up for a while. They just threw some pocket change at Now Production to whip up something for a budget release, which isn't always a bad thing, but for a franchise like this which hasn't had a mainline entry since World 3, can you really blame me for being a little annoyed? I'm not even that into this series other than the World games, and even I can see Namco's blatant disregard for it. Namco's Twitter account is full of comments saying stuff like, when's the next game for this anime IP? Hurry up on that DLC for this, when there are franchises they own that haven't had new entries in a long time and absolutely deserve it. I'm sorry, if you think Namco gives a single fuck about their consumers, remember they charge $60 with paid DLC for Jump Force. Hell, their merchandise doesn't even use the Bandai Namco moniker, it's just Bandai. It's like they're trying to hide the fact that they own one of the largest Japanese publishers in the industry. Actually, I'm not surprised you fuckers try to hide anything that isn't Shonen Jump from your brand image. You're not a game publisher. You're a fucking monopolistic toy company tripping over yourselves to make a Dragon Ball game every year.
What took you so long, idiot?
Anyway, this finally ends the Pac-Man World Retrospective. God, this was the worst idea I've had on this channel yet. I find this series to be fascinating as hell, but to be honest, I can only really consider World 2 to be a good game unless you also count re-pac. I know it's kind of harsh to say it's a series with only one good game, but we all have our opinions. Some people love World 1, hell, some people love and defend World 3, and that's totally fine. This video isn't out to attack you or anything, it's just a game after all. Perhaps I just didn't see what you guys saw in them. I only started playing these games back in September of 2022. Yeah, I didn't grow up with any of these. I sampled the first few levels of World 1 on an emulator years ago, but I didn't play any more of it. Pac-Man World 2 was the first one I fully played back in September, and I only bought it because I wanted to grow my Xbox collection, and it was the only Black Label copy I could find at the time that was in good condition. I enjoyed the game quite a bit. My thoughts on it have basically never changed since then, and that's represented in Part 1. It's just a simple, good game, not everything has to be a masterpiece. I then played re-pac because it was the new thing, and I had similar thoughts to World 2, I just wished it was more challenging. After that I played World 1 and 3, and well, you already know my thoughts on those two. So that's the World Series. I might give the spin-offs a try someday, or possibly the Ghostly Adventures games, but for now, please for the love of God, no more yellow circles.
Pac-Man pasta running up and down my nipples.